Ooh, my oh my, time sure is flying. It is August 20th today. September, or Labor Day, is next weekend. I cannot believe that winter is already almost here. So, as beekeepers, the main thing we're worried about right now is overwintering. So I figured I'd kind of just go over some of my most important tips I have for overwintering successfully. There's really only 3 that honestly even matter when it comes to overwintering bees. So let's chat a little bit. Speaking of the date, I can't believe I have a field full of goldenrod behind me. I'm hesitant to believe that it's only early blooming variety. I am starting to wonder if this is actually the normal goldenrod, not the late blooming. I believe we would still have around a month left of the blooms that we have and what is to come, as long as the weather cooperates. That is the key there. But I remember last year we didn't have goldenrod. Actually, we only had a pollen flow from goldenrod. We had no nectar from goldenrod, but we didn't even get that until almost October. And now here it is, the end of August, and we're already starting to get it. And the bees are working it. I see them all over the goldenrod, which is good because this is the yard that I've been complaining about all year and telling you guys that they have been starving because for some reason there has been no food coming into this yard. Well, they definitely need every little bit of help they could possibly get when it comes to food. All right, so I swear I was not able to do this a few weeks ago, be able to just sit out here with them just being calm and not bother me, because they were so ridiculously cranky. That is how you know your bees probably need some food. If they start getting cranky, they get hangry too, just like we do. So just kind of be aware of your hive surroundings, how they're acting will really tell you a lot about how the hive's health is going and just how everything's going for their preparations for winter time. But the 3 most important things for overwintering, and like I said, really the only things that matter when it comes to overwintering. I see there's so much information out there for new beekeepers to have to sort through when trying to figure out how to overwinter successfully. So I just want to make it as simple as possible and give you the only 3 things that really make a difference. And that is the very first thing being mites. I'll get to the other 2, so let's talk about mites first. So the reason that is first is because that is the first thing that you need to get in check before you start thinking about everything else, because you want your mite levels to be down to as low as you can possibly get them before they start making their winter bees. Now, because I'm seeing all of this goldenrod in this entire field, that tells me that they are 100% making winter bees right now. Generally, in my area, they start making winter bees in August. So I want to make sure that all of my mite levels are down before they start doing that. So that way, all of those winter bees are off to the best start possible and they're not being parasitized by varroa mites and having all of their fat body sucked out of them. Their vitellogenin, like I've talked about many, many times, which is responsible for helping them overwinter successfully, and also gives them the nutrients and ability to live as long as they do in the winter time. And also those viruses that a lot of varroa mites spread. You don't want those going into your winter bees, otherwise they're not going to be really hardy when it comes to keeping your hive alive through the winter time. So I usually like to put all my mite treatments on the very first week of August. Now I know it's kind of late to be telling you this, so if you haven't already checked your mites and gotten those in check, I would absolutely do that now, and I would not wait one more day. There's multiple different ways for treating. You can use formic acid, oxalic acid. If you use oxalic acid, make sure your vaporizer is set at a temp that does not make it decompose into formic. Ask me how I know. You can use Apiguard, Apivar. It generally is just personal preference on what you find to work best for you. I personally like formic acid and oxalic acid because they're organic acids, so they don't leave a residue in the comb, they don't leave a residue in honey, and they also seem to be more gentle on the bees. Now, formic, though, I would say is not very gentle. It is fairly harsh, but if you have a good queen, they come back so incredibly strong that honestly, I think it makes them stronger because of how hard they come back. So I honestly don't mind it as long as it's used within a period of your hive that you're not really needing your hive to grow. If you're needing your hive to grow, which really you shouldn't be trying to have that happen this time of year, it's a little bit late and you're going to overwork those winter bees, which you don't want to happen either. But if you're wanting them to like expand in any way, I would not use formic. It's going to set them back way too much. You got to think about timing when it comes to all of these treatments. But all of these, ooh, it sounds like I have like a little chipmunk or something in the weeds over here. All of these hives, when I did a mite check on them, came back between 0 and 4 mites per alcohol wash. So with 300 bees, that's just a little under 1% or a little over 1%, which is not bad at all. You generally want to keep them under 3%, but when it comes to the fall time, like right now, if they would have had around 6 mites, I would have 100% started treating. But because I did do those 2 rounds of oxalic acid, yes, I know you can't really do much with 2 rounds. You're supposed to do 5. But I did 2, found out it was decomposing into formic because it burnt all my brood. My hives were literally looking like they were collapsing because I did do it on a hot day. But with oxalic acid, you can do it on a hot day and not have to worry about it. If it decomposes into formic, though, it will burn your brood. But since it did decompose into formic, I was curious on whether or not it would actually lower the mite levels, and it did. They look pretty good. I'm not going to treat them at all for the rest of the year, and we'll just see how that goes. There are a lot of studies out there too that I've been seeing on actually hives that had really high mite loads still surviving and still being super strong. That actually the mite load does not determine the collapse of that colony with some of these newer genetics in terms of like varroa resistance. So that'll be something we're definitely going to have to look into over the years and kind of like study and analyze. That will be really cool to see. But anyways, okay. So the second thing that really matters for overwintering your hive successfully is moisture. Now, this is something I swear I got it down perfect my first 2 years, but ever since I switched these migratory lids, oh my gosh, it has been such a nightmare. Because these aren't like telescoping covers, so they don't come over the hive. So if you open up your hive at all during the winter time, you break their propolis seal, and now there is going to be a river of water just flowing on in. You definitely don't want that. If you have a telescoping cover, you can get away with cracking it open to add supplies or food or anything like that, because it covers over the hive body, so you don't. This fly will not leave me alone. it has a cover over the hive body, so it keeps any of that water dripping in. So that being said, if you do have lids like this, you want to make sure you do not open your hives past October. They want to have that propolis seal on there to protect any sort of runoff coming in. And the other thing being is you really want to make sure you have something to block the cold from the outside from clashing with the hot on the inside. That's where you're going to get some condensation underneath the lid, and then it's going to drip on the cluster, and it could potentially freeze the cluster. In fact, it will, because it's not cold that kills bees, it's actually moisture that kills bees. So when so many people say, "Oh, my bees froze to death," well, they probably froze to death because it was too moist. That's what you mean, right? Okay. Because they actually are pretty resilient, and they can vibrate their bodies to keep themselves warm and generate heat. And they will actually rotate throughout the cluster, keeping the queen in the middle, so that's the warmest. And that's also where she's going to be laying their brood and whatnot, because she does still keep laying eggs throughout the winter time. She does go through a broodless period around like December, January, but then she starts kicking it right back up for springtime in order to prepare for the spring flow. So when they're doing that, they rotate their bees in and out so that the cold bees, they can warm back up, and then the warm bees, they sacrifice and go back out. But anyways, I don't know how I got on that topic, but that's how they work through the winter time. But they also generate moisture just with how they breathe, because when they exhale, there's moisture that goes into the hive. Now, some moisture is okay. They do need some. So that's why I've never been a fan of putting insulation around my hives on the outside. Now, maybe if we lived in like a more northern area like Canada, maybe that would be something that was beneficial. But in Michigan, our winters are bad, but they're not as bad. At least lately, we've been having some very, very mild winters. So I actually want them to have that hot on the inside clash with the cold on the outside, because they're gonna get a little bit of water and condensation forming on the sidewalls of their hive. That is something they can use for water, because the bees still do need water in order to survive. And in the wintertime, they can't really fly around and find it, and everything's frozen, everything's covered in ice, so that is their best water source. So I like to use just regular insulation foam that you would buy for your house. You can buy it in giant sheets. I'll put up a video, and you can cut it into squares for your hives. I usually like to get around a 1 inch thickness. Anything less, and I find it just doesn't seem to be quite enough of a barrier. Now, another thing you can also do just as a safeguard, and this kind of will tie in with the next thing I'm going to talk about, as well as moisture, and that is doing something called mountain camp method. That is something that Casey is absolutely in love with. He's done that every single year he's been a beekeeper. We didn't do it last year, and he was literally biting himself in the butt for it. We had a lot of old equipment that had a lot of leakage, and then also these lids that I keep telling you about, we were opening them up and we were breaking that propolis seal, so there was some water that started dripping in, and we lost a lot of our hives to moisture as well. I would rather lose my hives to mites than moisture, because moisture, it's like, that's beekeeper error. I mean, mites are beekeeper error too, but when it comes to trying to breed for mite resistant bees, that was kind of the goal, so that was okay. But you can't really breed moisture resistant bees, that's not possible. So beekeeper error kind of stings a little bit, but that's okay. So you just put that insulation foam right underneath the lid, and that will protect from any sort of clashing and condensation. So mountain camp method, the theory with that is that when you put it on top, you can use it as emergency feed with, like, say, like you put a shim and you put newspaper down, and then you put just regular sugar right on top of that. It will work as emergency feed, but then it'll also kind of work as a moisture absorber, because the bees cannot use just plain sugar by themselves. It has to have some sort of water added to it. That's why generally I used to always just mix it in a mixing bowl until it looked like wet sand. I'd mix it with a little bit of water and some sugar, and that's how I'd pack it on top. So at least it kind of started that process. But you can also just do it with pouring it straight on top, and that'll soak up any sort of leakage that you possibly have. So my third last thing that is the most important when it comes to overwintering your hives is your food stores. Oh my goodness, especially with the winters we've been having lately, because they've been so mild, they start blowing through stores like crazy. Now, this is also where it's important to have bees that don't consume as much honey. There are different breeds of bees, like Italians, that will just blow through all of their honey stores. And then you have the Russians and the Carnolians, and those won't blow through them as fast. At least in theory, that's the goal of their breed. So you want to have bees that aren't going to require quite as much food, because especially if we have another mild winter, it could come to a point where you have to crack open your hive and put on emergency feed. But now you just crack their propolis seal. So now you're going to have water leaking in on top of it, especially if you have a wet spring. See the dilemma. But you want to have around 80 pounds of food on your hive. Now, if you can overwinter in singles. We're going to be overwintering in some singles this year, not just double deeps. And for those, honestly, you can get away with around like 50, 60 pounds of honey. It's just them being able to access all of the food. So I'm gonna take a look at the hives this year going into winter, and I'm gonna make the call on if I want to rearrange anything. Because for some of the genetics that like put their honey, like, okay, you have a normal hive and they put all their honey over here and all their honey over here, and they make it in an arc, but the cluster's right here, and then maybe they're just like over here and moving up, and now they have no honey, and the only honey they have is all the way over here. How is that going to help them? So my thought was, what if you arrange the hive so you have like the brood and everything right here, and then you have the honey like this, so then they can just start moving over and eating into the honey, and then just go like this, and they have all of that honey right there next to them. I have noticed that some of the hives, actually the one I'm sitting on in particular, have been building out their hive like that, which is very interesting. They're doing like a 5/5 setup, and then just leaving the rest of the frames, top and bottom, like a 5/5 honey storage area. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But in terms of food, so Ideally, for me, I don't want to have to add too much to my hives after the first week of September. We're going to be picking up syrup here soon I'm going to be putting onto the hives. I'm going to be picking up a tote of it. So we're going to be mixing up 2 to 1 sugar water that we're going to be putting into these colonies for them to start taking down. We like that thicker mixture just because it helps them put on weight. Um, It'll stimulate them a little bit with brood because they'll just have so much food coming in, but they will directly start storing that in their comb, and that's what you want. I would much rather have extra storage inside the comb than having to put on emergency feed, because something I noticed last year is that whenever I put on emergency feed, they immediately stop what they're doing and just move all the way up to where the emergency feed is. Now, I wonder if that's because they think it's like a spill in the hive, so they just start trying to clean it up, and you always have sugar to spill through the cracks, so I don't know if it just like sprinkles on them and then they get annoyed with it, so they're like, oh, we got to get rid of this, so they just move up to the top of the hive. That's not where you want them. You don't want them there until really it's starting to warm up. Otherwise they could easily starve if they're already at the top of the hive. So we're going to be putting on tons of sugar and syrup onto these hives so they start taking it down as quickly as possible. And once they get up to weight, we will close them up and not open them again until really next spring. Now, you will have to keep in mind that there will be some swarming problems once goldenrod really starts coming into your area. So you do want to be aware of this and make sure you are moving frames the way that you have found best for you to keep them from swarming. I know everybody has so many different ways of how they like to do things. I don't want to tell you what's the best way, but I wouldn't necessarily say give them space, because that is the last thing you want to do in the fall time, is give them space. You want them to be packed in there with a lot of bees so that they are forced to start filling it with as much honey as possible, and they are going to then start condensing their cluster size down and encasing it with honey. That is exactly what you want. They're going to start shrinking their brood nest. Don't be alarmed. This is a normal thing, and this is something that needs to happen. That usually doesn't happen until around September, end of September, October, I guess I would say, for this year, if I'm just looking at how the goldenrod is right now and estimating when it should probably be over. But one last thing, when it does come to feeding, I've always said that if you do feed, you have to feed at a high velocity. And what I mean by high velocity is you have to feed a lot at once. Otherwise, they will just use that as food. So I have 1.5 gallon frame feeders in the top and bottom of these hives. Some of them only have one, and I generally like to keep it in the very bottom, closest to the brood nest, and I will just fill that baby right on up. And honestly, these hives I just did, I think it was like 4 days ago, and I just checked them yesterday and it's already completely gone. These hives also really needed food. I put pollen patties on them. Their pollen patties are already gone. They blew through them so incredibly fast. So this is the time of year that you want to set your bees up for success by making sure they have enough food, making sure they have low varroa levels, and making sure they're able to combat that moisture the best way possible in their hive. I guess there is one more thing I should mention, and that is there are multiple different ways to also combat moisture, in terms of you can have an upper entrance for the bees, and that will also help wick away moisture. But I was also reading other articles saying that it can cause like a chimney effect, and you don't really want that, because then the bees are always having to generate more heat to keep warm, so they'll burn through more stores as well. Honestly, it's just whatever you find to work best for you. I like to just do a normal entrance. They're like about a 6-inch entrance, I would say, on these pallets at the very bottom. I can post a video and show you guys. And we don't do any upper entrances anymore. We just do our insulation foam up top. If we feel like that hive is going to need some emergency feed, we will put a shim and emergency feed on. But then after that, we're just going to close them up and just forget that we're even beekeepers, I guess, until around February, when I start putting pollen patties on again. Alright, so I hope this video was at least a little bit helpful for you and that you are enjoying your beekeeping season. This has been such an out of the ordinary year. Oh my goodness, we had so many swarming problems in the spring, so many swarming problems in July, which you normally don't have. And on top of that, we didn't really have a lot of our main flows. We completely skipped black locust, completely skipped basswood. Pretty much all the trees just decided to skip this year. So it's been an interesting year to be a beekeeper, to say the least. So if you are a new beekeeper and maybe you didn't have the best year you were thinking this year, please be easy on yourself and keep going, because each year is different. You can never really tell how the year is going to go until it goes. I guess I'll just leave it with that. But all right, I will see you guys soon, and don't quit and be fit.